Welcome to Higher Edification, a podcast about higher education and the challenges that we're facing in that sector of the world these days. I'm Dan Myers. I'm the president of Misericordia University in Dallas, Pennsylvania, and I'm the host of Higher Edification. We have a very special guest today, Father Dennis Holtschneider, who is the president of the Association of Catholic Colleges and Universities here in the United States, and he is also the former president of DePaul University in Chicago. And I think you were the president of DePaul for what, 13
years? Yeah.
13 years, yeah, I remember that well. In fact, I first met you at a conference for higher education administrators. It was being held at Boston College, but you were the president of DePaul at the time.
Oh, so that was the Institute for Administrators. Yeah, so three of us founded that 27 years ago.
Is that right?
I've been at every single one since.
Is that right?
Yeah.
So it's still going,
still
and a vibrant thing.
Yeah, it'll be going again in 3 more weeks.
I enjoyed it immensely, and I really enjoyed getting to know you because I just thought you had such great insight into what was going on in higher education and what was happening in our Catholic higher education world as well. So, but tell me, one thing I love to do in these podcasts is just get to know our guests a little bit, make them into real people for those out there who are listening. And I'm just curious a little bit about your background. And I did snoop on you a little bit, and I found out that you were a math major at Niagara University when you were an undergraduate. Is that right?
Complete geek.
Complete geek.
I have the card and everything.
Did you come into undergrad saying, I want to be a math major?
Oh, yeah. I thought I wanted to be a math teacher.
Oh, is that right?
So math secondary ed. Most of my family were engineers, men and women. And I came in for a math degree, which my father never completely understood because he thought engineering made more sense. You could do something with it.
Yeah, right.
But I loved it.
That's great.
I never felt like I had homework at night. I felt like I had a puzzle to solve.
Wow.
Which meant that I enjoyed my major, but I couldn't talk about it back in the dorm.
Were there a lot of math majors at Niagara, or were you sort of standing alone?
Oh, there was probably about 8 or 10 of us in my year. So, yeah.
And that is a Vincentian school as well.
It is.
And that is your order. And so I was wondering, maybe you just tell us a little bit, like you're an undergraduate and you're studying math, and you start somehow thinking about becoming a priest. What was that journey like?
I had started that before then. I had started. I had thought about it in high school. I was the rectory kid at the local parish who met people at the front door, and so I knew the priests really well. And I knew the sisters at the school and they had taught me in grade school. And so, and they were over at our house for cookouts. I mean, it was just part of the family. It was an odd thing, and it was priests and sisters were part of our life growing up. It's a different day today, but back then, they were part of the community. And so I had started thinking about it in high school, but I decided to go to college and get a, quote, real degree. And in case I decided not to go that direction, and get a teaching degree. And I met the Vincentians at Niagara and really liked them. And I liked how they put together poverty work with the church work that they did. And they were in education as well. And they really saw education as a primary way to move people out of poverty. And that became kind of a life project. And so I've been doing it ever since. And there was a vocation shortage, so their standards were low. They took me.
I don't believe that.
And I've been with them since. So anyway, so I went into their first level training program when I was in college. I went into the novitiate, finished college, and then went to seminary after college.
Did your parents, did they like the idea of you becoming a priest, or was that something, you said your dad thought maybe you should be an engineer?
My mother was thrilled. My father simply said, if you ever want to come home. But he was proud to. I'm one of 8 children. Every one of us did our own thing, completely went our own directions, and our parents raised us that way. They raised us to follow our dreams. So doing that, I think, made them happy. Plus, we were all off the payroll, so they were happy about that too.
Now, when you finished seminary, did you then go into higher education? Were you teaching, or what happened there?
Well,
how did you end up being a president, I guess, is the question.
Yeah, that wasn't the plan. I thought they had lots of high schools when I started. By the time I got ordained, they had handed over most of the high schools to different dioceses, and they had no more high schools, or closed them. And so they sent me to work in New York, and I was adjunct teaching at St. John's.
Oh.
I was working at their seminary there in a lower level job, and teaching at night. I had my 2 master's degrees in theology at that point, divinity and moral, and I was teaching moral theology and teaching business ethics, and I decided I should go get a business degree if I was going to teach business ethics. So I started doing the MBA in finance, and that was kind of a summer project. And after 3 years, the Vincentians said I could go do a doctorate if I wanted. For people who are going to stay in higher education, that's the next level of education. So that's when I went up to Harvard and I did the degree in higher ed policy.
Well, that and then you had an administrative role somewhere, right?
I came back to St. John's. I came back as a faculty member, tenure track in the Graduate School of Education, teaching the doctoral students.
Right.
And then they asked me to become an assistant dean in the college to help out. And so they cut back my teaching load, and I had 1 course per semester, graduate students, and I had the doctoral student dissertations. But basically, my day job was the college, and then that was my life. My life was earning my way towards tenure. It was teaching. It was working as administrator. I became associate dean. The dean left, and they reorganized. I ended up running the Arts and Sciences College on Staten Island for St. John's, and then my alma mater called, Niagara University, and they were doing a leadership change, and they asked me to come up, and the school was struggling at the time. And so they brought me and another priest, Father Joe Levesque, who it's odd and wonderful to talk about him today because he passed away last night.
Oh.
And Joe has been a support in my life my whole life. But Joe invited me to come up with him. He was president. I came up as executive vice president, and we decided to put our hands to see if we could strengthen my alma mater. And so it was a turnaround project. Did that for 4 years, and then DePaul called. And that was its own turnaround project. And I headed to Chicago. And then I was there for 13 happy years before going on to other things. But it was a good life. So none of it was planned. Each one of those were kind of calls along the way. And I kept learning the next level because I dove into the pool. So I learned to swim.
It's interesting. A lot of people that end up doing these kinds of roles, you kind of get drafted into some of them, many of them as you go along. But I've learned to call it a call now instead of being drafted. But
good Catholic language works. Even vocation.
I should have said that. We're here at Notre Dame doing a conference for people who are thinking about presidencies.
Right.
And so we're at Notre Dame, where I was for years. And my first administrative role, I was drafted into being the department chair here at Notre Dame. But I should have said I was called to it. So that would have sounded better. But
and little did you know you'd be a president soon enough.
No, I had no inkling that was ever going to happen. So, but it is interesting to talk about that because you do develop this sense of call and admission as an administrator, right? Where you kind of learn different ways of making a contribution to the environment than what you had as a faculty member, right? And those can be really powerful, and they can really change an institution. As you're saying, you had a rescue project on your hands when you went to Niagara.
So and you kind of learn when you're an associate dean, where you can see all the things that need attention, and you don't have any power to do any of it. So you're hearing from the faculty what's not working, you're hearing from the students what's not working, and then you're taking it upstairs, and they may or not be listening because they have so many other things to listen to. And you kind of realize, oh, if I had that job upstairs, I could fix this. And there is a part of that. That's part of the senior leadership piece is actually learning to attend to the organization and what it needs. And if you go into those roles with ears open, you can get a lot of good done. And people are grateful for it.
I always ended up, when I was at a transition point, I'm like, I could go back to the faculty, or I could go be an associate dean, or go be a vice president, or whatever it was. And I always had this moment of just thinking about how much impact I could have as a faculty member versus what I was doing administratively. And I could see ways that I could do it, and that maybe some other people wouldn't, because they didn't have the same experience or sensitivities as a faculty member, or I used to work in student affairs too before I went back to grad school, and so that was another piece that I always brought along with me, and so yeah, you see these opportunities. And
no, but of all the things that I do, if you ask me where I'm happiest in the minute, it's still teaching.
Yeah.
So I always taught until I was a president. So even as assistant dean, associate dean, running the college, as executive VP, I always taught somewhere. In Niagara, I taught at UB's doctoral program, University of Buffalo's. And so it was just one course a semester, but it kept me doing what I loved.
Yeah.
When I became a president, that wasn't possible anymore. So I just did those summer programs like at BC.
Well, I am going to try to teach one in the fall.
Oh, blessings.
I might call you for moral support.
The first time you do it, you know perfectly well. It's brutal. The second time you do it, you're just adjusting, so it's easier.
I mean, it's been a while too for me. So, but I do love it so much, and I miss it. I'm going to teach my favorite class. And
good. So you've done it before.
I've done it before. I used to teach it here even way back in the day, and so it'll be interesting to try to fit that in with everything else that's going on in my presidency life. But I'm going to give it a shot just because I miss doing it so much. But I was going to ask you about presidency. So I mean, that's a good run as a president, 13 years. These days, if people make it 5 years, you're kind of impressed because it's gotten.
I used to tell people I wasn't above average, but I was beyond average.
Beyond average. Very good. But when you look back on that experience, and you are very much in touch with presidents now. I mean, ACCU in many ways is a president's organization. And so, what is so challenging about it now? Is it really more challenging, or do we just perceive it that way? How do you were a president and you lived through a long period of doing this at a challenge. I mean, DePaul is a really great place in so many ways. I've always admired it, and its focus on social justice and reaching people who need help for their higher education. Wonderful mission. So that wasn't like a presidency where you could coast. I mean, that was a challenging environment. So you had challenges, but what's going on now? What do you see that's so tough?
Oh, a few things. So yes, none of these jobs are easy, and whatever the size of the school. In some ways, I had 25,000 students. In some ways, that's a little bit easier than a school that's working with 2,000 students. Because if you lose 10 students, you have to change the budget at a smaller school. Yeah. And so I'm not going to pretend that my job was the most onerous, but it was, it was the perfect job if you had a short attention span. I mean, there was something that was going to hit your desk every day, and that you weren't prepared for. It was going to come flying at you. I think a number of things have changed. I mean, I've been out of a presidency for 7 years now. So I left in 2017, and then so now I run the association for all the Catholic colleges. But I noticed a change even during my time. And in the first year, I was only there a few months, and we had a kind of a blow up between our Palestinian students and our Jewish students over an art exhibit of Palestinian art that told the history of Israel in a way that actually wasn't factually true. It wasn't just offensive, it was wrong. And at a university, facts matter. Right. But it was art. And you can't touch art, and yet it's not telling the truth. And so what do you do? So we brought in faculty, because we have faculty, and we had them create, handouts that people, when they came into the exhibit, could get the real history. And then we had programs that where both sides were debating and talking about the history. And we had educational events. We could do all that together. By the time I finished, 13 years later, I could no longer create events for people on both sides of an issue, because the other side wouldn't come. People would only come for their own speaker. And at first, when I saw this happening, I thought it was something happening at DePaul. And then I realized, oh no, the country's changing. And so we're educating now in a place where people don't want to hear alternative ideas, especially anything that challenges their ideas. And they're not coming to college to be challenged in that way. They're coming to be confirmed and given information that they can then use for making their case. And they're good kids, but that's the world in which they are growing up. And so it got harder. It got so much harder to be a university for those highly charged moments.
Mm-hmm.
Because the whole point is a university can bring knowledge and information to the fray that is developed around an issue, but only if people want it. And so I think that's hard. Our presidents get dragged into an awful lot of things that aren't of their making.
Mm-hmm.
It's whatever the world is fighting about, you get your version. So as we speak, it's the Gaza-Israel issue, but it's also the transgender issue. I mean, whatever the society is fighting about, we get our version of it at a university.
Mm-hmm.
And our presidents aren't satisfactory to either of the sides. They're not conservative enough, they're not liberal enough, and they're the same person.
Right.
And they're caught in it. And they're just trying to be a university for the question.
Yeah.
And they're trying to get people's attention long enough that we can create educational events, and it's hard.
Yeah.
So I think that started in my time, but I think it's gotten much worse in the 7 years since.
Yeah.
And then I think the finances of an institution have really gotten harder to pull off. And that was steady through my whole time, but it's just continued since. There was a day that the government was a partner, and especially for kids who don't come from wealthy families to go to college.
Mm-hmm.
And that partnership has eroded steadily for 20 years now.
Yeah.
But it's still eroding. So the value of it keeps going down, and the cost of it keeps putting more and more on the students and their families, which makes it harder and harder and harder. And so the universities more and more are discounting their tuitions to try to make it easier for the students, but they can only do that because they still have to pay salaries.
Right.
And they still have to pay all the expenses of running all those complex campuses. And so the students and the universities are getting squeezed.
Mm-hmm.
And it was happening in my time, and it's probably even more challenging today.
Yeah. Well, and there are fewer students around too. That's another problem.
That's
traditional age students, right? And so that's compounding the problem you just described, right?
Yeah. So that we use the word demographic cliff.
Yeah.
That there's less 18-year-olds.
Yeah.
And that's true. And and that's not evenly dispersed across the U.S. So the North and the East have it much more the case than the West and South. But the new data came out 3 weeks ago. They redid all the data around the cliff based on the 2020 census data.
Okay.
And it's actually 2 cliffs now. So in another 5 years,
There's another one.
Big drop coming in a way that we hadn't even seen, because we were using 2010 data up till now, which was fine because you're predicting when people are going to be 18 at your place.
Right.
And still, it's going to be harder still.
Is there some segment out there that's growing that we could be tapping into more? Or, I mean, some people talk about adult students, meaning non-traditional age, older students who are further along in life. And I mean, they're there, but it's hard to get them to come back to school. And, the margins on those kind of programs are slim. And so it's harder to pull them off, I think, for some of us anyhow. But is there somebody out there that we should be working with that's, sort of being underserved by our sector?
Yeah, we created an entire college. Well, we had an entire college for adults when I arrived, and we grew it. And so it is a market out there. And people say that the market's not going away because people's jobs keep turning over so much that people have to reskill.
Mm-hmm.
But they're not looking for whole new degrees when they reskill.
Mm-hmm.
They're looking for specific credentials.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is a market for credentials. It's growing like crazy. There's almost 1 million credentials now logged in the official system that counts these. And for a long time, it was going to non-providers of higher ed. It was going to Amazon and to Google.
Mm-hmm.
And all these providers, mostly in the IT marketing spaces. But now, just recently, people are starting to come back to known name universities. Mm-hmm. And I don't mean national necessarily, like Notre Dame would be a national name. But Niagara, where I worked, is a regional name.
Right,
the whole country doesn't know it unless you remember our basketball history. Mm-hmm. But Buffalo knows it. Western New York knows it.
Yeah.
And if you are in your market, if you are a known name, that market's starting to come that direction. People are what people want is a degree that'll help them get a job. And they want employers to trust it. And employers are deciding now that they're trusting the universities they always trusted on the quality of those credentials. And they don't know what to believe about the other credentials that are out there. They want to believe in an Amazon, they want to believe in an IBM or a Google, but for a lot of these providers, they're not names they recognize. And so it's interesting to watch how the market is starting to shift again and just starting to come back to known entities that employers trust and know.
Huh. That's interesting. I guess, I mean, as an employer, you wouldn't, Amazon, that you wouldn't perceive that as being one of their primary businesses or something that they're doing education.
And yet they're a major producer now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. If you think, most universities, if you think your competition is listed in U.S. News and World Report, you haven't been watching what's been happening in the past 5 years.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, one thing we should talk about here, because you're the president of the Association of Catholic Colleges and Universities, is what's going on in Catholic higher education these days, and is it facing some special kinds of challenges? I mean, we have a lot of these schools, these small schools you mentioned, where a 10-student swing is meaningful.
Yeah.
We have a lot of schools like that in our group, but so that's one piece of this. But is there something that we should be thinking about in particular about Catholic higher education? It's been such an important part of the American higher education scene for so long, and not just the big schools like Notre Dame and DePaul, but small ones like Misericordia and Marywood and Niagara, all these others.
Yeah. So and Catholic higher ed moved. We still have close to 200. All across the country, of very different types, all throughout. But even the smaller schools are incredibly important for their region. They may be the major employer for that town. If they went away, that town would suffer mightily.
Yeah.
And so these are important schools for the next generation that doesn't want to go away for school, that wants to stay in the region, probably because they want to build their life in that region. And so why not get an accounting degree in the region where the employers are? You can have your internships there and have a job. It makes sense to do a degree in the region you want to build your life. And so for a lot of our local schools, they have that, but they have all the challenges that all schools of their size have. So we don't have special schools on the special challenges on the financial side that are different from other small liberal arts schools, but we have all of the challenges that are particular to small liberal arts schools right now. And so not all students want a liberal arts degree, and our Catholic schools always specialized in those.
Yeah.
And now we also had professional schools too. We've always kind of done both. For a lot of our schools, that's where they're hanging in these days financially, because students are shifting towards that. Even here at Notre Dame, the English department dropped by 50%, half. It's a national change. It's not just for small schools, but the larger schools can weather it better.
Yeah.
Right. And so for the smaller schools, that's a piece. I think if the Catholics have anything that's particular challenge to us, I think the Catholic brand has been broken. And I say that partly because of the scandals. Today's 18-year-olds or even 22-year-olds, and there has never been a day in their life where the headline on the Catholic Church wasn't a scandal of some sort. We forget how long that's been a national story, but it's been their whole life. That's the only story they've seen over and over and over again. So that's not great. Our schools have to overcome a broken brand in some ways. The other piece is that for a lot of the young, they have social convictions that aren't shared by the leadership of our church necessarily, even if they were raised Catholic. And so that mismatch sometimes makes people wonder, well, do I want to go to a faith-based school? And what they don't realize is most of our schools, maybe except for about 10 of them, are not Catholic schools with Catholic curriculums for Catholic students only. Most of our schools are gifts to the world, to be a ministry to help people take that next step of their lives and ask big questions and think about how they want to engage the world and how they want to be human beings and ask them big questions. But we're not trying to make Catholics out of them. And that's most of our schools. And so we are in a position of having to try to explain that to 18-year-olds. Without just simply saying, oh, don't worry, we're not going to make a Catholic of you. We have to show them, here's what we can do. And here's the really big stuff. You get to be engaged in some of the most thoughtful questions on how do you run an economy? What happens to the poor on the side of that? What's wrong with politics, and what makes for good politics? And how does a person engage that well in a way that serves people at its best? How do we think about climate? Why do we think about climate? Learning how to engage with issues. And so there's not a Catholic school that's not dealing with ethics in all those fields.
Right.
And we can bring students into all those conversations and prep them to be involved with those conversations worldwide, because that's what we've always cared about.
Well, there's a their social justice drive that they have somehow, which is stronger in this current group of students that's going through college than I will say 20 years ago. And that is something that can be tapped. And it's like there's a congruence between that impulse they have and what they're going to experience at a Catholic college or university. Right. And that can be very productive and it could feel like a great place for them to be to actually engage.
And the nice thing is we're doing it. We just have to make sure people see it. So that, because it's something that students find life changing once they come.
Well, my school is a mercy school, and the charisms of the religious sisters of mercy are just right down the line in terms of what I think students they're yearning for in a sense these days, and then the critical concerns that they define, that the sisters define as their big issues. Those are exactly the ones that students care about so much, and so getting that in front of them, what a resource for us in terms of both recruiting and also doing this work of forming people into adults that are going to be good members of their communities and of the world. It's powerful, actually.
Preparing them and positioning them to enter into that work in the world. It's great. It's worth waking up in the morning. It's just a tough business model to figure out, but it's worth waking up in the morning to do it. No, I love that vibe on our campus, and it's present in so many ways because the mission is so out front, and it's what you're saying. I mean, it's Catholic in its character, but it's not Catholic in a sort of overbearing way where we're trying to, as you said, turn you into a Catholic or something. That's not what we're trying to do, but we're trying to use this intellectual tradition and this social justice tradition, this Catholic social thought tradition, to engage people in something that's more meaningful than just how can I make another buck. Right. So we'll teach you AI. We'll teach you the technical stuff that you need at the nursing bedside of the patient. We'll teach you how net present value works in accounting. And we'll do all the technical, but then we're going to ask you the biggest questions about what matters in this world. And how does the world work, and why does it fall apart, and why is it such a mess to watch on CNN? And what are the best thinkers in the world thinking about it? And how can you build a life to actually one day wake up and say, I made a difference? And how can we position you for that? That's the work.
That's what you want in the end, is you want to matter, right? And so giving people the kind of intellectual tools to be able to do that, and tapping into their drive and helping them to develop it. That's good stuff. That's really that's why I'm doing it. So I just love to see that in our students and in our faculty and staff as they're developing their continuing engagement with our mission and things too.
Oh, absolutely, and our alums. To watch what our alums do with their lives makes it all worth it.
Yes. It's really quite powerful, and it makes it all worth it in the end. And people are always sort of worrying about the value of higher education, but go ask one of our graduates whether they would do it again or not for the price they paid, and they will. I mean, almost all of them say yes, absolutely. I'd go to Misericordia again, or I'd go to DePaul again, or I would do that again because they got this kind of thing out of it.
And even if all you cared about was money, and earning potential one day, the return on investment is tracked by the Georgetown Center for the Workforce, which is it's at a Catholic university, but it's not a Catholic office. It's some of the top economists working on education return on investment, and the top return on investment after 10 years are the Catholic universities. Period. And that stretches out for the next 40 years. Stronger than the publics, stronger than the public Ivies, stronger than the big name privates. It's the Catholic university is the highest return, and that's just the money piece. And what we're talking about is something so much more.
Yes, that's right. Right. Yeah, I mean, it's nice to have money, I'm sure. But when you get to the end of your life and you look back and you say, was I impactful? Did I mean something?
Exactly.
it's not going to be how much is in your bank account. It's going to be how you impact the lives of other people,
right?
In good and not so good ways, And so, one thing that's interesting to me, Father Dennis, is that when I was looking for a presidency, when I started looking, I really, really wanted to go to a place that had a strong mission, and I thought they were really trying to live it. Because I've been in a variety of places in my career, and some of them really had it, and some of them did not. I mean, it was just a climbing thing. They didn't care who they were stomping on, and they had a nice statement. But when it came to how they actually operated and were training students, that wasn't what it was about. And so here's a little thing I did was I'd read their mission statement, and then I'd start looking for cracks. Okay. And if I saw a crack, I had a big spreadsheet, with all these schools. And if I saw a crack, I just said, well, if I'm seeing a crack at this point in time, there's a problem. So I put in the no list, right? And so I did this exercise. And at the end, every single school that was left on my list was a Catholic school. Now, somehow the Catholic schools have maintained this sense of mission and identity in a way that other schools haven't, And most of the private schools in the United States started off as religious schools, and so many of them have lost that identity over time. But the Catholic schools have seemed to have held on to it more strongly for some reason. I'm wondering if you've reflected on that. What do you think is behind that, the strength of that for Catholic schools?
So it's interesting. The original research on this topic was done here at Notre Dame. It's a book by an historian who's no longer with us called The Soul of the American University. And he wrote, I'm blocking his name at the moment, which is why I'm not mentioning it. But he wrote this book about all the Protestant universities that used to be religious that dropped it. And they're just secular universities. And that book came out around a time that our presidents were all meeting around 1995 at the University of St. Thomas in Minneapolis, and it became a matter of conversation at that meeting among all the presidents, because we were already being pushed by Rome to say, hey, you become stronger universities, but how are you Catholic? And we were kind of in those conversations with Rome, but it was that book that galvanized, because the presidents realized, oh crap, it happened to the Protestants, it can happen to us. And so that's kind of it was not the moment where the conversation started. It was the moment where people adopted it as a national project and said, we have to give this thought. How do we keep the best parts of us vibrant when the people who used to do it were the priests and nuns? The Jesuits, the Sisters of Mercy, the Franciscans, the Benedictines, pick your group. And they're all aging and stepping aside and retiring. And how are constant changeover of lay people going to keep the heart of these schools alive? And that's when we started hiring mission officers as new VPs at the cabinet table. It's when we started creating these national training programs. It's when we started doing research on the topic. It became, board committees on mission. It became, I'm not sure we've ever completely figured it out yet. We still have schools with mission drift. There's a reason for that word, that have kind of losing their way a bit. But most of our schools have held on to it because it's been an intentional act. All right, we have to train our people. We have to talk about this. We have to put money in the budget towards this. We have to put art around campus. We have to inspire ourselves. We can't let this conversation die, because this is too important. The Sisters of Mercy made a huge difference for the world, and so many others. And we want these schools to continue to make that difference. And so we're still experimenting with how to keep a culture alive with a constant turnover of people. But lots of organizations do it. The Marines have a constant turnover of people. Boy, they keep their culture alive. Ben and Jerry's has a constant turnover of people, but they have a culture. And organizations can keep cultures alive if they're intentional about it. And since that time, we've been trying to get better at being intentional around that question.
That's interesting, and that's it, right? With all these things, you have to be intentional if you're going, because it's not easy. And there's always temptations to go in a different direction. I was a chair of a board for a little Catholic Montessori school just down the road here. I don't know if I'm pointing the right direction when I lived here, and it was really a really strong social justice mission, and many of our kids. We had line of how many kids had to be from below poverty line households in that
yeah.
school. And it was hard because they couldn't pay anything, and we had to pay the teachers, and there were always temptations to set aside the Catholic part or the religious part,
right,
because we'd be able to access more money from the state or whatever in order to do it. But we, and we would have these discussions, but we'd sit there and we'd have to say to ourselves, no, we're not going to do that, because we think what we're doing is really special and meaningful through the identity that we have, and sticking to that mission, and reminding yourself constantly. So the staff at the school, when they would have their staff meetings, they went through a ritual at the beginning of every staff meeting. They read the mission out loud together.
Yeah.
And those kind of things, they sound hokey in a way, but they're not, because they take you right back to what it is that you're really trying to do.
And it reminds you, for this moment, it might have been other people in the past, but for this moment, it's on us.
Mm-hmm.
And then someday others will follow us.
Mm-hmm.
But right now, it's us.
Yeah.
And so it's hokey, and it works for those reminder moments.
Yeah. Well, and I think one thing that happens, we were talking about mission drip, but some schools, like, I think the mission is almost used as like a check to make sure you're not doing something wrong, right? So you go ahead with your plans, and then you say, oh, is that okay with our mission? And then you go check. But what it ought to be is the font. It ought to be the source. You ought to start your day going, how can we live our mission better?
Yeah.
Right? And then it stays at the center instead of getting moved out to the periphery.
Yeah, no one gets it perfect. But if you can keep asking questions, sorry, we've got some of this working. At DePaul, all of our students at the undergrad level knew who St. Vincent de Paul was.
Yeah.
The culture completely reinforced that. Everyone was proud of it. They all went through training from the moment they did their first campus visit. They heard about St. Vincent de Paul. But I don't think our graduate students had a clue they were at a Catholic university, much less a Vincentian school. They came and did their MBAs and left. They were working all day. They did the degrees, they left. So we needed to work on that.
Mm-hmm.
And then on our online, we had a lot of online students. And I don't think at first we were very good at helping people realize, there's something more to this school than just an online class. And how do you get what's special about the school into parts of it? And so the questions never end. You just take it piece by piece and just say, okay, this year we're going to work on that.
Yeah. Well, that's particularly tough with online students, right? Because they're not there on campus. They're not encountering the art or people outside of their specific coursework that might engage them in these kind of conversations or events and activities. They don't do that stuff. So what do you do with online students?
Actually,
it's tough.
Actually, it's not the whole answer to your question, but I'll give you a fun. They came into my office one day at DePaul because they knew that was one of the priorities for the year. And we have at DePaul one of the top animation schools, and work with all of Hollywood and all the rest. And they came into me with a little cartoon that was just a single line that would keep changing into different figures. And suddenly it was Vincent de Paul. And suddenly Vincent de Paul was welcoming them into DePaul University, telling them they had just been accepted.
Oh, neat.
So their accepted video, which they received online, was this little fun, really fun, made you laugh out loud cartoon of St. Vincent de Paul recognizing you, welcoming you, and then telling a little bit of the story of DePaul and the history into which you're coming in, and other things you could click on if you wanted to learn more. But it was just these little things help you realize, there's something about this school that I knew the name was DePaul. I didn't realize it was a guy who had. He was the guy who had to figure out what to do with urban poverty, because before him, 400 years ago, poverty was a rural thing. And then there were 3 wars in France, and everyone came into the city, and there was no provision in Paris. So he had to think, how do cities do poverty? And so that was his time. Our question was always, all right, what's required now? But anyway, they get brought into that history, and you can have a lot of fun at a university. In bringing the talent to bear that you got in-house to think creatively. And most of the good stuff at DePaul wasn't my idea. It was I raised the question, and people all around me at the university came up with really creative stuff.
That's one thing great about being in these communities. There's so many resources for doing all kinds of great stuff, and you just got to remember to ask people around you to help you do it and to put their mind to work on a special topic. But let me just turn you to one more question. And it's just, what do you see ahead for Catholic higher education now? What is we are facing challenges, and there are these lack of waning numbers of religious that are available for leadership in college and even in faculty. We have one Sister of Mercy left at my school. So what's ahead for these schools? What do you see happening for us?
Well, I mean, so this for the schools, they need to continue with that intentional piece. Okay, how do we do a culture that's not dependent on the sisters being present? And most of our schools have already had to figure that out.
Yeah.
And they're still experimenting and trying to figure out how to do it better, because you're not going to replace these women who were their mere presence so inspired people, because they gave their lives to this stuff.
Right.
And did amazing work. And at the same time, your faculty are doing amazing work, and your staff are doing amazing work, and their lives can become their own witness to people, in lots of simple ways. But so number one, we have to continue down that path of how do we create a culture that inspires people to give their lives in service to a world in whatever field of study they pick. So some of our schools, we've lost 10 schools in 4 years. It doesn't make us worse than the rest of America. It makes us along the same path as the rest of America for small liberal arts schools. And so our smaller schools have to scramble right now to or risk not surviving. And so we have some of those small schools. And so either they're going to do it together in various combinations of partnerships, et cetera, or they're going to make the shift more towards the market wants, which is more of the professional programs right now. And they're going to figure out that balance. They're going to figure out what their region of the country can sustain and would benefit from. It's kind of the old strategy question. It's just on steroids for speed. Universities work at slow speeds. The ones who are the smaller schools who do well are the ones that can move a little bit faster right now.
I think that's really essential. And one of the strengths of higher ed is that it is deliberative, and so I chafe a little bit when people are, you have your board members, right? They're business people who have really charged ahead with a great gusto in life, and they can't understand why things take so long in higher ed. It's a strength, but also in the, there's a balance in there somewhere between being, too slow and being able to get some stuff done that's going to benefit the university in a relatively short period of time. But you can't do something that's going to take 10 years to develop. Now you're not going to make it if you. So that's a big challenge, no doubt about it. Trying to get that balance right.
Well, God bless you, and God bless everyone like you. I'll do this job for a while. I'll step into the pool. These jobs are wearing. They take a lot. They ask a lot of you. They take a lot from you. But it was still the best job I ever had in my life.
Well, you get tired and it's trying, but then graduation day comes and you watch these students come across the stage, and some of them is just unbelievably life-changing. They never thought they were going to be able to go to college or whatever the story is.
Or you watch their parents in the seats who never got to go to college, and and that their dream was that their kids would. And you just you can get misted over quickly.
They've done something really different than would have been expected, and it's really going to change their life for the better in so many different ways. So now you're finishing your time as president of ACCU.
My term is done.
So now I'm going to put you on the spot. Like what's next for Father Dennis Holtschneider?
I have always I've always had this academic administrative tug and pull, and I'm gonna go back to my academic self for a couple years. I have 2 books I've long wanted to write. One is on strategy in higher ed, which I've been privileged to teach for a long time, and one is on this Catholic question. What does it mean to be a Catholic university today? So I'm going to try to punch out those 2 books in the next 2 years. And I've been given the Cardinal Bernardine Chair at Catholic Theological Union as an affiliation and a place to do it. So I'll be back in Chicago.
Wonderful.
And mostly hiding and writing, but also doing some consulting. I'll be working with some of our schools and other organizations around some of these questions. So there's a consulting firm that I've worked with just a small amount over the years called Nigrin Consulting in LA, and I'm gonna work with them a little more fully in these years to come.
I see. Very good. Mm-hmm. Well, that's great. Wow, I went right down your pike then today, didn't I? With the topics well, we'll have to have you back on when one of your books is ready to come out, and we can talk about what you've written about, what you've reflected on there. But I'd love to do that actually, because you know, I mean, you're going to dedicate your intellect to this for a while, and so I'm sure you're going to write some great stuff that we can all learn from. I'd love to have you back and push that and get people to attend. So. Well, everyone out there, thank you for joining us. I want to thank Father Dennis for being with us. This has been terrific. Lots of important thoughts about what's happening in our world. And we hope that you enjoyed the episode and that you'll tune in again next time for our next edition of Higher Edification. I'm Dan Myers, your host and president of Misericordia University in Dallas, Pennsylvania, and we will see you next time.